Are we going to talk about our film?
No, I thought we were going to speak about the brilliant situation in terms of whatchamacallit. Well, this
Oh, we're going to talk
before
about
and
FINA
after.
first. Sorry, the
Yeah,
graphics
let's
of
just talk
Cool
about FINA
Runnings
right
came
now, and
on
then we'll go into our
earlier.
film because I think this
That
is
is absolutely
interesting.
perfect. So FINA
Yeah.
is last week we saw cycling basically take a move away from this stance. Cycling has softened its policy. Basically, they're going for a more inclusive policy. FINA, they have basically voted quite heavily in favour of confirming their existing policy in terms of trans athletes and competing in swimming. So essentially, what they've said is we're keeping our categorizations. We're not going to move towards allowing any male athlete who has gone through any stage of puberty from competing as a in a female category post transition, etc. This is how it's going to stay. We're keeping our existing categories. What they did say, and I think we need to be fair to FINA as an organisation, they haven't. It's not like they're taking a closed-minded approach to this. They've said we're very comfortable with the idea of an open category, where we're giving that option to athletes that goes for of both genders post transition if they would choose to compete. But what they're saying is we are not going to take a move which we feel will compromise the existing classifications. So that would be cis women and cis men. Obviously, the main criteria they're having there is once a male has gone through any stage of puberty, they're not going to be able to compete in the women's category. And I think we saw one of the first people who came out today in rapturous support was Sharon Davies. She obviously has been very vocal on the issue about what she feels is protecting cis women from competing. And I think there were some very interesting photos up today of some female and male cis swimmers post various competitions. And in the nicest possible way, swimmers, when you see their bodies, they are so hugely developed that for both the women and men, it's just the physical characteristics are like it's such a physically draining and like your strength levels must be absolutely immense for it. But I think people in their minds they don't think of swimming athletes being so muscular and so developed. And I suppose we've seen with Lynn Thomas in the last few months, we've had that discussion has become a bit more open. And this has probably to an extent pushed FINA's hand. Athlete Alley, which is a pro inclusion website and platform, they've been very quick to come out and criticise and say that FINA are going against the Olympic Charter and the Olympic policy, and they really aren't. From what I can see, they may take a different view on this, but they're leaving the door very much open in the same way rugby has. And I think people also need to recognise that World Rugby, who have probably been the other organisation with the strongest stance on keeping the status quo for a sport in their categories, because they feel the disparity in the same way that swimming does, the disparity between male and female categories when a transitioned male has gone through puberty are too big to overcome by saying we shall just say okay, now we can allow inclusivity at the expense of, in their view, women who are at a disadvantage. So both sports have come out and they both have policies which are now quite similar in the sense of their categorization, but they've also both have a very strong push to say we will have an open category or we'll have trans competitions. The idea being that we're not excluding, we're just seeking to include in a way that facilitates the existing athletes who are already there and who may otherwise be at a disadvantage. It's not going to be a popular decision, but when you look at the numbers involved, the voting, I think, was not only was the vote quite highly in favour, there were a number of countries and members who decided to abstain. But I think the abstaining numbers almost matched the dissenting numbers who were voting against keeping the status quo, which was interesting in and of itself. Like the vote was quite strongly in favour of this, which I think is a very strong message. And I think, would the vote have been the same if we hadn't had all the US publicity in the last few months? Probably not. It may have
No, and I
not
mean
have
this is
elicited such a response.
and this is I mean this is a picture of Leah Thomas after she won the NCAA swimming title. I mean, this of course as the first slide up here. This is Leah before she transitioned, obviously in the left. And then this, and I mean, there was an awful lot made, and again, I don't like the way this was framed and the kind of sneering
Oh,
attitude.
completely. And we discussed that. We did discuss
Yeah,
that as
I
well,
mean,
that it,
we've gone through this, and we've had an academic who explained why this was wrong to have Leah Thomas swimming against women. We've got into some depth. I mean, as you mentioned, this is Sharon Davis here. Now, Sharon, of course, I think she's in her 60s at this stage. I mean, she was, you know,
she's looking very well.
yeah, I mean, she's looking well. A lot
I'm
of,
being past
she's,
remarkable, but she is.
yeah, no, she's done a lot on her face, but like I mean, she was terrific. Of course, her body is pulled out of shape. She was up against East Germans. She was always kind of like, she was the golden girl of British swimming. Of course, she was in a long-term relationship with someone who was not too averse to putting like dodgy stuff into his body, Daley Thompson. And of course, Daley Thompson was up against this gentleman. This is, of course, on the
Caitlin.
left is Bruce Jenner, and on the right this is Caitlyn Jenner. Now, of course, I can't look at Caitlyn Jenner without thinking of South Park, but that's my issue. But there was a question raised. Caitlyn Jenner, of course, who was Woman of the Year a couple of years ago when she transitioned. He said, I don't know what you and other women were doing. I mean, good God, you get beaten by, first year as a woman, and Caitlyn Jenner's already off.
Look,
So
new to the competition, so we just, beginner's luck.
yeah, exactly. Can't be most improved, so it has to be best in class. But one thing that was raised was with the amount of stuff that Bruce Jenner had been taking as a decathlete, super athlete, had kind of like knocked off his whole body. But I think that that's really unfair, and that was said in an interview by a couple of female athletes who had suffered due to bad behavior from like female athletes. So I mean, so the question is, Isla, do we think that we should look at this and be a bit more decent to trans athletes and not have this kind of like
Oh,
sneering kind of down look at or looking down at men who transition into females and vice versa.
100%. We shouldn't. I think it's very unfortunate that for these discussions to become real in the sense of ones that people look at and actually take a meaningful discussion about, there have to be individual athletes involved. And that's a big issue because Leah Thomas she chose to compete, yes, and she probably didn't realize what would happen in the sense that that she was going to become a global name, that she was going to become the face of we need to stop this in swimming on the part of the people who were lobbying in FINA to ensure that the policy essentially would protect cis women. But by the same token, Caster Semenya didn't want to be the face of DSD athletes. I think there is a level of we shouldn't be turning around and blaming the athlete for wanting to compete. I think there's a disconnect between the fact that do you necessarily think a trans athlete should compete with cis women in certain sports, show jumping, horse racing. There's no concern for welfare in the same way there is with rugby or boxing. Swimming, it's a case of competitive advantage is what they're citing here. I think the problem is when we start to, it's almost like a blaming the athlete. Like our culture is to turn around and single out this individual who's already obviously gone through a huge amount to be able to come out and not only transition and all that entails, but to come out and try and compete in a sport where they know there's the potential for the spotlight to be on them further. And it's obviously a love of both the sport and competing. I think we need to move to a culture where, yes, we're trying to be inclusive. Yes, we're trying to respect individual participants, irrespective of whether they're trans athletes, whether they're cis existing participants, but also not making it about an opportunity to run a hate campaign against the athlete, because that definitely is a huge concern. The damage we can do to young women and young men from doing that is huge.
And I'll add on to that as well. Isla's dead right, because of course, then the hate builds up against if you raise a question. If you raise a question about, well, hold on, I don't think that trans women, men who transition to be women, should be competing against women who are like born as women. Immediately you're transphobe, you're a TERF, and you'll end up being destroyed. So it's this insanity, and the people who do that, who open up both barrels on people who question the legitimacy or even the morality of having this. Someone who has had an advantage being born, has passed through puberty, which is a known advantage. Going in against people who haven't had those testosterone advantages from childhood or from puberty, it's a very difficult situation. And of course, then we also see it, as Bill Maher rightly said, about this whole, that it's now cool to have a trans child.